All right, here we are walking through the campus of the University of Texas, right here in the center of Austin. It is a cultural hub. It's an academic hub.
It feels a little bit like home to me. I spent 3 years here and then taught here for 2 years after. So
there you go. I spent 4 years here as an undergrad, and I didn't teach, but I learned some things. There's a lot I didn't learn. A lot I've had to learn the hard way.
Hard knocks.
That's right.
That's right.
This is a maze of old buildings. I spent a lot of time on this campus as a student, but I also spent a lot of time on this campus as a filmmaker. As Ben pointed out, making the movie Tower, some of which we stole on campus, I can admit, almost 10 years later.
Ooh, yeah, I think the statute of limitations is up probably on that deal.
Yeah.
And where are we walking to right now, Keith?
Well, we are on our way to the old RTF building, and there we are going to go meet a friend, a mentor, a teacher, a doc filmmaker.
The former chair of the department of the film school.
Yes, that's right. We're going to meet Dr. Paul Stekler.
He puts the doctor in documentary. Yep, that's right. I said that.
Okay.
He's a supporter of up-and-coming filmmakers. He's at almost every screening. And when I started in grad school, I really got to know him, and he became the chair of my thesis committee, and he helped me make Winnebago Man.
All right. So Paul has played a pivotal role. I think he is a consulting producer on Tower. He did some consultation, and my favorite piece of consultation, I'll save for when we're talking to him, but he's played a pivotal role in both of our careers, and we are not alone in that. I went to his retirement party a couple years ago.
Yep, I was
and
there.
It was like a cavalcade of This Is Your Life testimonials, filmmakers of every stripe,
yep,
and many nationalities, and many styles of filmmaking, all kind of stepping up and talking about how Paul had impacted them.
Absolutely, and leading by example. And in my case, he even gave me a check once. So yes, I have a very soft spot in my heart for this guy, and I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Paul Stekler. So let's do it.
On your left.
You're listening to DocWalks with Ben and Keith. All right. Paul Stekler, Ben Steinbauer, I'm Keith Maitland.
Hey guys.
And this is not DocWalks, but instead DocTalks.
Ooh,
DocTalks.
Well, SITS doesn't sound quite as exciting, I think.
I'm going to credit my son Theo this morning when I told him we weren't going for a walk, we were just going to sit and talk. He said, you should call it DocTalks. And I said,
Genius.
And
it's onto something.
It's got an extra layer of meaning since we are sitting here with a doctor, Dr. Paul Stekler. And where are we right now, Paul? Tell us.
We are right out in front of the Communications A building, which is where the radio, television, film department that I was part of for 27 years and was lucky to be the head of production and then the chair of resides. A department that I love, a department that Ben, you were part of.
That's right.
And a department that would have been better if Keith had been part of it.
I wouldn't.
Debatable.
That is indubitably the case that it would have been better for me if I had been a part of it.
That big word.
I can't speak to the whole department. But Ben wouldn't have known anyway because I would have been long gone by the time you came around. I probably would have been one of your teachers. And that's happened naturally in life anyway.
All right, Paul. So as you know, this podcast is about us talking to documentary filmmakers, because what we hope people can get out of this is learning about how successful filmmakers started their careers, how they came to be.
Sure, yeah.
Keith and I, as I think most people, are huge fans of your pivotal film, which is Setting the Woods on Fire, George Wallace.
We are pivotal fans of that among the many. And I was going to say, we don't want to get tied down in just a never-ending list of all the different projects you've been on.
Yeah.
But would you mind, just for the sake of our audience, kind of giving us some bullet points on titles that matter to you from your long career?
Well, I love all the films I've gotten to work on, but Eyes on the Prize, Civil Rights series, I helped make a couple of those films. We did 3 films that were on a series called POV, Louisiana Boys Raised on Politics, Getting Back to Abnormal about New Orleans politics, and Last Man Standing, film I'm proud of about Texas politics. I helped make the choice for Frontline in 2008, the presidential film, and then George Wallace setting the woods on fire and Vote for Me, and a number of other films. But, and I also have helped a lot of people on their films here.
Ben claims that you helped on Winnebago Man.
Well, I was his thesis chair for the original one.
And do you remember the story of the review, the year-end review that split the entire room and was, at least in my recounting, in my memory, a kind of a scandal in the department for a second? Do you remember this story?
Yeah, kind of. It was kind of like all those reviews were so ridiculous.
Really quickly, at the end of every year, you would go in front of all the professors in the film department and they would essentially sort of grade you. And you would have to give a presentation of like, here are the films I made, here's what I want to make, what do you guys think? And then you would be either lauded or ripped apart, and oftentimes both, for, what were they, 10, 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So we're in this little auditorium. It's the end of my first year. I've made all this stuff. I'm feeling really confident, showing all this work. And then I say, and the film I really want to make is about this viral video and this guy who doesn't know that he's a celebrity, and I want to find him a bowl. And the first hand that goes up is a woman who really didn't like the idea. Yeah. And,
You gonna name names here, Ben?
sure. Her name is Colleen Smith, and she had kind of an experimental bent. And like, I think she maybe just didn't understand my vision for it, because basically she raised her hand and she said, "How dare you? Who do you think you are that you're going to go remind this guy of the worst day of his life, blah, blah, blah." And it just totally stunned me, because that was not my intention at all. And then Paul was the very next hand raised, and he goes, "I'll be the chair of your committee and help you make that film." And the room just went, just divided. And I remember being like, this is crazy, and this is a great idea. This film is going to work because of this type of reaction.
I have one question. How dare you?
Yeah, but experiences like that are very useful for young filmmakers, and that you've got to be able to understand, first of all, not to be defensive on anything anybody says, okay, but also understand what's useful feedback and what's not useful feedback, because you're going to get it from all different sides. And, a lot of times, even the craziest feedback, there's a kernel of something there that's worth thinking about. That somebody says this scene stinks. Okay, well, maybe it didn't work for them because something 15 minutes earlier didn't explain something for that. Yours was not the worst case. I remember, one of my students, having an entire room say that his film was immoral, was horrible. And I pulled him aside. I was also his thesis chair, and I said, "Don't listen to a single thing they said." And it was on national TV on POV. So it was, the way it was. So it's kind of like, it wasn't that they were wrong. Well, they were wrong, but,
Well, but you have a good point, because, in a room full of filmmakers, they're all going to tell you how they would make the film. Whereas, like, when you have a screening and you get notes, you have to kind of read between the lines of notes and think, oh, this reaction is because, like you said, they just didn't understand something previously, or the way that I'm talking about it is rubbing them wrong. So I need to, figure out how to, couch it in a different way. And I knew just instinctively that I was not trying to make fun of this guy. So I never had a concern about it ever feeling that for us. That she didn't know me well enough to know that was the tone or the intention. So, yeah.
A lot of art school reviews are like that. Let's tear them completely apart.
Yeah.
And then let them melt. There's a wonderful independent film called The Sunlit Light, mostly shot in Norway a couple of years ago with Jenny Slate. And it starts off with her as an artist getting the shit ripped out of her at a review in art school. So, and then the same people give her fabulous reviews at the end of the film, and neither of them make any sense. So,
well, I have to say, like, I didn't go to film school, as Paul mentioned earlier. I went to UT. I was an English major, creative writing focused, but I always worked in movies, and I always knew I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I didn't think I was missing anything by not going to film school. But the older I've got, the two things that I know that I missed out on were, and one is on me, and one is on the system. I missed out on building a cohort of friends and colleagues that were all kind of going through the things at the same pace, the same time, that could rely on each other. Like, I certainly have creative friends that were all but they're all kind of doing different things. And so it wasn't like anybody was able to kind of just like chuck out what they were doing. With the one, example being my friend Patrick Floyd, who jumped in with me to make Eyes of Me. It was things lined up in his life to be able to do that. But I didn't have a cohort, and I know like Ben's business partner to this day, Barrett, is someone you met
In grad school.
in grad school. Like, so the idea of having a cohort
on this morning. Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
But the second thing, and this is the one that I think is even more valuable in the scheme of things, is I didn't learn through experience how to take notes, how to give notes, and how to kind of survive those tough critiques,
Sure.
that come through the process of filmmaking, film school. And so when I started making my own work post undergrad, I was kind of slapped in the face a few times by reality when people had opinions and wanted to share them, because I hadn't gone through
You
that.
still don't like notes.
No, I really don't.
Well, we share that, but I don't like notes either. But I got to tell you that, I mean, first of all, you guys are both wonderful filmmakers. Well, now, and I got to be,
And that's a great podcast, folks. Thanks. We'll see you next week.
yeah, and I'm proud to be a peer of yours. But one of the things that I also like about you is that you both give feedback in a way that's useful. You're not trying to remake my film or somebody else's film. You're talking about what the inner dynamics are and how something might work, something might other work, and it's useful stuff. It's not like I would do this or I would take this out or whatever, which is not useful at all. I mean, it's interesting to listen to.
Right.
And I never get people to write anything. Whenever I go to one of those, big screens with people, I don't write a single thing. I say, if you want to talk to me, I'd be happy to talk to you.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, just to put a bow on that, I think as two working filmmakers, and obviously, Paul, you've like spent a career doing this. Like, we watch other people's movies, and we think, or at least I do, I get excited because I'm like, I want this to be good. Selfishly, I'm like, I'm rooting for you. I know how hard it is. So my objective is never to tear something down. It's always to be like, of course, going. Keep, like, I know this is hard. You're doing it. Here's the things that are good, and focus on those.
one thing that was really helpful for me along these lines was teaching here for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
Because, it's really easy to destroy somebody, especially a young filmmaker like the people you were filming back there, Keith. Okay, but it's something else to be able to let them make themselves feel good about what they're doing,
Right.
so that they actually listen to what you're saying and also accept the fact that, sometimes they're going to, react to it well. Smarter ones do, like Ben. Okay, and sometimes they're going to ignore you. And something? That's fine.
Yeah.
Not the end of the world.
Well, those are the two lessons I know that I've missed out on film school. I'm sure I'll pick up on more and talking to you. But let's go back to the beginning, the very beginning. Young Dr. Stekler. I think you were in seeking your PhD when you first became a filmmaker. Is that right?
I mean, basically, the story is very unlikely, this whole story about how this got started. I was in grad school at Harvard working on my PhD on Southern politics. And a friend of mine, Tommy, who was getting an MFA in sculpture at MIT, which was mostly throwing bricks together with sand, he had this thing that he borrowed called a video camera. And I had a car. And we'd drive around Boston at night with him hanging out the car, taking pictures or videos. And he said, there's this guy where I borrowed the camera, and he's drunk a lot, and he's really funny, and he seems to have made films down south. His name is Richard Leacock, and you might like him. And Ricky was the head of like a documentary program there. So I invited myself over one day, and Ricky was drunk, and Ricky was fucking hysterical. And he was telling all these stories. And he liked me. We must have been talking for a long time. And he goes, "You want to see a film I made?" And I go, "Sure." And it's about George Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door in Alabama. I'm watching this film going, how did you do this? What is this?
And this is not like some doofus. This is like one of the founding fathers of
Cinema.
Yeah.
No, he's a giant.
This is Richard Leacock. He was a famous filmmaker. Yeah. He was the drunk guy.
Yeah, he was spending time with a schlub graduate students.
And he was running the program at MIT at the time?
Yeah, it was a documentary program. Ross McElroy came out of it, and Ed Pincus, and it was a fabulous program. Then a couple of years later, I was teaching at Tulane. I talked to somebody, and she said, "What do you want to do with your life? You seem bored." And I go, "I want to make films." And she connected me to somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. who was an associate producer at WYS in New Orleans, and I had lunch with him and his producer, and I made up a story. It was my dissertation of how black politics in the Mississippi Delta a decade after civil rights, and they said, if you can raise some money, we'll let you be the assistant writer.
On your idea.
And
My idea.
Yeah.
And, we went up to Mississippi. I raised, I don't know, $10,000-$20,000. I became the director. And we made a pretty good film. Could have been better, but it was a pretty good film. And got a New York Times review. I figured this is easy.
Hey.
And then the next film, I think I raised 1/3 as much money for a film about ethnic politics in New Orleans for a mayor's race. And then both these films got seen by a guy named Henry Hampton, who I was connected to through his secretary, who was a buddy of mine. She was a ski bum turned secretary. And Henry told me he was doing this series on civil rights. And we both were interested in black politics. And he said, you got a PhD from Harvard. You want to be an advisor on the series? And I thought about it for a second. And I said, well, free trips to Boston and stuff. And I said, no, I'd rather make a couple of the films. And he looks at me and he goes, what a weird idea. And a year later, he hired me. I was the least qualified person of all the filmmakers.
Wow.
I talked a lot because I was a very confident guy. And that's the story.
And what was it that, was it seeing that George Wallace footage that Richard Leacock showed you that made you want to focus on films? Because because obviously the politics thread makes sense, but what was it that turned you on about making films? Was it?
I think it was just a combination of stuff. I didn't come out of seeing that wanting to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But as I got into this and I began to look at stuff differently, I remember right around that period of time, I saw Days of Heaven.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm sitting in my seat. I don't know if you remember the scene where Richard Gere and his girlfriend are escaping from where he's killed somebody in Chicago.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's a wide shot of the train going over a trestle with smoke going up in the air, and it's exposed for the sky.
Yeah.
Unbelievably blue.
Yeah.
Everything else is unbelievably black. It's Leacock playing. And I said, oh my God, I've never forgotten it. As a matter of fact, when I finally met him years later.
Terrence Malick.
Yeah, Terrence Malick. I said, I got to tell you, that one shot, I've never forgotten it. So little by little, you guys know this, as you begin to think about being a filmmaker, all of a sudden you see things differently. You see, I did a lot of climbing and backpacking when I was a kid. I never thought of thinking about the light at sunset. And then I began thinking about it, or I'd be in the middle of nowhere and I'd be going, it's not as if there's no sound here. There is sound. I just have never concentrated on it, and so it's an accumulation of thinking about that stuff. Now, quite frankly, Keith, in the next life, I wouldn't mind going to grad school to learn something because I learned it on the fly in my films, and I'm technically useless. I think of when I was working with Margaret Brown on her film, the Townes Van Zandt film, Be Here to Love Me, she would be talking about color palettes and things some I've never thought of. I'm sure they're really important. That's what the cinematographer is there for me.
Right.
But it's just a different way. I have, the thing is I know politics really well. I know history really well. So I'm useful for that.
Well, let's talk about that because it's something that's always intrigued me. Because I didn't go to grad school, I didn't know that documentary filmmakers didn't do every job. And so I started out, I mentioned this on the walk up here, I started out with Eyes on Me, which you consulted on and helped out in the very early stages of, but I was a producer, director, shooter, editor, because I thought that was the job.
Yeah.
And it was through meeting other filmmakers like you in those early days for me that I realized you could be a director who doesn't hoist a camera, who doesn't run the reels and the edit. So what is your role when you, especially in those early days? And then I'm curious, how that's changed over the years.
It hadn't changed at all because I'm a horrible shooter. I have really bad hearing from being in too many bands when I was a kid. So I'm not a very good sound person, though I like having those things on because I can really hear then. But no, it's always been the same. I just direct, and I'm also, it's like when I brought all those guys up to the Mississippi Delta in 1982 to film my friend Bob Clark running for Congress as the first African-American state representative from the rural South since Reconstruction running for Congress. And they're looking around and it's like we're on Mars. What do we do? And I knew where we were. I knew what was going on. I could talk to people. And that was the skill that I had. and so I just kept going with that. It was kind of like, I was lucky enough, even though I had budgets, they were pretty tiny. And everybody liked the films I was working on, so they worked basically for nothing. I think I made my first 3 films for, I don't know, $60,000 total, for 3 features.
And where did those films go?
They all were on national TV. I'm incredibly lucky. Okay, like, the first 2 films were on national TV, Hands Up Cotton, Among Brothers, and the third one, Louisiana Boys, was on POV. But basically Henry Hampton hired me because I'd made these films for no money. He liked the films, but he liked the fact that I had the moxie to be able to just do this, have the crew sleeping on my floor, for months on end. And I would borrow cameras. I borrowed a Betacam when it came out for a news station in New Orleans where I was doing the nightly analysis. And I said I'd borrow it for a day. It was like a loaner. And I borrowed it for 3 months. And that's how we made it. It's kind of like you got to do what you got to do to be able to make your films. Yeah.
I think that's basically like how I started too. When I was in undergrad at KU, I just used my dad's video camera that we had, and I made that. My first couple of bad documentaries were on that. So I think your instinct is not wrong, that like you have to do everything when you're first starting out.
Yeah,
for sure. But it sounds like you had an interesting path towards that because you didn't have that technical prowess, but you had the ability to apply for grants and to raise money.
And also to convince people that were much more talented than me to work with me.
Right. That's its own kind of skill, because like that's not easy to do, as most people know.
Well, one of the things I love about your films, and even the way you talk about like setting up these projects, is there's always a big idea that you are driving towards, which is not everybody has that, right? Like some people say there's a community and I want to go absorb and tell the story of that community, right? Or there's an entry point, there's a door I want to walk through, where it takes me. I never know the third act of anything I've set out to make. But you start out like a theorist, right?
Yeah.
You have it's like a scientific method, and you're going to test that theory through the process. Is there ever a time where you went in with a theory and discovered that you were far off base and had to totally reset the chessboard, or have you always been able to kind of follow the outline that you've set forth?
Never, always. Yeah. I mean, the deal is that I'm a political professional. I was a pollster, a pretty high-level pollster, who could have worked on national campaigns. I ran campaigns. I almost ran for office in Louisiana. And one of the reasons I was able to get anybody to talk to me in politics was that I could talk the talk. Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. The second I was there, they knew I was one of them. And so that, the concepts were, not brilliant. This is not talking about, atomic physics or something or other. It's, what's going on in this election? What are the stakes? And how does that help a broader understanding of what our politics is like? And when a few times that I did history, it was not all that, dissimilar. I'd read a bunch of books. I would talk to historians who also liked talking to me, because I was a filmmaker who treated them with respect, as opposed to many filmmakers treat them as, they're on the grant. And a lot of these guys, remain my friends, and I like their books and I like their stuff, and I would learn from them. But the basic concept, like I did a film about the Battle of Little Bighorn, the concept of expansion in the United States and the displacement of Native Americans and all that. I was working with a Native American writer, James Welch, a novelist who I really respected, loved his books, and was amazing working with him on Indian reservations. I just learned a lot of stuff, but it was in the context of a basic idea of why are we here? What are we trying to do? I never tried to get anybody to tell them, regurgitate what I thought. I wanted to hear what they said they thought, and I was into long paragraphs. My idea of a great interview is something where somebody can talk for a while, and you don't get bored, and it goes from this point to this point. It's like a good shot. A good shot is I see something over here, and you move the camera here for a reason. Okay, and it resolves itself in something. I thought the same way with talking to people. It's interesting. In 2008, when I helped Mike Kirk do the 2008 Frontline about Obama and McCain, he had a completely different way of thinking about interviews. He wanted to chop them up, sentence from different people. And it took me a while to figure out what he did, and it was brilliant. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And we actually finished that film with a long quote from Matt Bai, who's a wonderful political writer, which Mike said, I'll never finish the film that way. I'll never finish it that way. And I kept going, this is a brilliant finish. And then finally, when we got the final cut, he finished it with that quote. So I had a little bit of an impact on it. So
That's great. Well, I love, your years of teaching, I think, have given you such an interesting viewpoint on what it is that makes for a good documentary versus a bad documentary. And I love what you were just talking about, that, a shot and having to motivate the camera, what you're looking for in an interview. We hope that a lot of young filmmakers are listening to this podcast. So what would be some things that, like, if they're starting out making their early projects, like, what makes a good documentary in your mind?
Well, Ben, you probably heard me, talk about this in classes. For me, one of the most important things is why you're there. What do you, is a point that Keith made. What's the idea? Okay. I mean, you can be Margaret Mead, an anthropologist, put a camera down and hope something happens, and that could be interesting. But I think it'd be much more interesting if you have some sort of a reason to be there. What are you passionate about? What are you really interested in? When you first came up with the idea of Winnebago Man, it was mostly, funny videos, that people had found and whatever, but there was a kernel of something there. And I think between that and your detective hunt for that guy, you can get this larger idea of why we care about this stuff, in a personal story, and so, for me, I'm always looking for a character or characters who are really good on camera, who are accessible, and are really reflective, as opposed to people, a lot of times politicians and important people, they're not reflective at all. They're just, they're just talking, they're used to talking to the news, and it's not very interesting, so I think it's a combination of passion, story, characters, it's not brain surgery, and that's what I would suggest. It's kind of like, it's funny, you had Jesse Moss on. I've known Jesse since he first started making films,
Plus, he was into politics too, right? Like, that's how he started, was it?
Yeah,
politics?
yeah, but the very first film that he came down to show me was the one about the stock car or the demolition surgeon. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, I loved it because the character was great, and also it was New Jersey.
Yeah.
So
Well, Long Island, I think.
anyway, one of those things.
Yeah. But how did you and Jesse connect?
I don't remember. It's just kind of, he found me. He found me. Maybe it's because of politics. I don't know.
Yeah.
Gosh, who was the guy that made Street Fight? Marshall Curry.
Yeah.
Called me up and he was making a film, and we talked a bunch about how to make films about politics, and his film, was very, very successful. The guys that made Spellbound, showed up at my office here.
Great.
And just they were showing, I think at South by, I think, and they said, come to see our film. And I liked them a lot. I was going, God, spelling bees kill me now. And I got in almost before the film started, just so I could get out. And 10 minutes in, I was crying.
Yeah.
It was such a wonderful film. So I don't know, it's part of a community of folks. The one cool thing about Austin was that I used to joke in New York about, where's the community? And I knew lots of documentary filmmakers, but it's not like we all hung out together. I'd have a drink with Alan Berliner every now and then, or I'd go to see Judith Halfand every now and then. But when I came down here, there was a real community. I didn't know what to expect when I moved here in 1997. I was a little scared. Is there anybody I can work with? Does anybody know how to use a camera? I don't know anybody here. And not only were there people here, a lot of them associated with the RTF department at UT, but they were really talented and they were really friendly and they liked hanging out, and it was a much more calm way of living. I worked with a lot of young women. Sandra Gardato was my editor, Deb Lewis is a shooter, and they were moms, and it was 5 or 6 o'clock, it was time to go home. And I go, are we going to keep working? Like we are in New York, till 2 o'clock in the morning? No. And once I got off that, I was going, that's okay.
Yeah.
I can, go home and watch TV or go out with my girlfriend or something or other and just have a normal life.
Right.
So, the move down here was pretty great.
Yeah. What was the first film you made after you kind of reestablished yourself in Austin?
George Wallace.
Yeah.
I'd done a lot of the legwork, I'd raised a fair amount of the money, from the NEH and the American Experience, which sadly is now, going kaput with the cuts. But I did most of the production work out of here. Sandro Guardado was my assistant editor and set up an office, and we worked out of the building in back of us over here, and then over to the Dock Motel that Ben knows. And that was the first film. I mean, I got here in '97 spring. We mostly did most of the filming, which was interviews, late '97, early '98, and then it took us, almost to January 2000 to finish when we were in the Sundance.
And that was, I mean, this is like your biggest hit.
Well, that's why I was.
George Wallace.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a game changer in a lot of ways because, I appreciate that your early films were on national television.
Sure.
But they were films that were, for the first two were verite films.
Yeah.
And then Eyes on the Prize, you were kind of a part of a continuum where you worked Eyes on the Prize 2 and 3.
I just on Eyes on the Prize too. But I was going to say, Keith, that Vote for Me was the one that I finished before we came here with Andy Coulter and Louis Alvarez. And quite frankly, I've never seen another film like that in terms of politics. I wish more people had seen it. It was on.
I love Vote for Me. Yeah.
It's like it's a really, quite frankly, it's a really amazing film. For 4 hours and the way that it works from sequence to sequence. So that was done right when I came here. It was on national TV in October of '96, and I moved here literally on my birthday, January 3rd, 1997.
Wow.
And then after George Wallace, we made Last Man Standing, about Texas politics in 2002. And then I kind of took a hiatus. I did this series called Special Session in 2005 and 2007, which was a weekly series, during the legislative sessions. And we would do little documentaries, and some of them were really, really good. Deb Lewis shot them, Sandro Guardado edited them. All in the Dock Motel.
Yeah.
So I just kind of did what I wanted to do.
And I want to stop you right there because George Wallace in particular, if we just talk about that film for a second, is incredible because of its access. That you were able to basically convince the biggest racist in the world, in most people's minds, to basically do a mea culpa at the end of his life.
Yeah.
That is an incredible accomplishment. And that also speaks to your ability to have a relationship with somebody like that and to gain access. So I'm really curious about that part. Like,
And the pitch on that.
And
To Wallace.
To Wallace, yeah.
Well, it's the same pitch I use with everybody, Ben. It's kind of like, I want you to tell your story. And you come at it not as like, I don't know what happened back in those days. It's kind of like, as filmmakers go, I was kind of an expert in Southern politics. I knew Wallace's story. I knew where he fit in, and he was already doing mea culpas, trying to, apologize for his past. When he got reelected the last time, it was mostly on the back of African American votes in Alabama. So the transition had already happened. But I got to tell you, I can't think of almost anybody in many, many years of filmmaking that have ever turned me down, to film them. Now things have gotten a lot harder, because now people are, scared of cameras. They want to totally control stuff.
Yeah.
But no, for all that time or whatever, everybody, wanted to be on, wanted to talk to me. I was much better in my professional life talking to people than I was in my private life. I should have brought those same skills in.
Well, one other
It'd be good to have Deb and Sandra in the mix. Yeah. Well, like Ben was saying, George Wallace kind of like, to me, that's when I became aware of you, was George Wallace. I went back. I don't think I've seen all 4 hours of Vote for Me, but I've seen selections of Vote for Me. And then Last Man Standing, to me, is my favorite kind of political doc because there's such warmth and heart and a great sense of humor in that film. But at the same time, it's like a microcosm of the national story told through the race here between Rose and Green.
One really important thing for young filmmakers is that I've always glommed on to the people that I work with. So I think George Wallace is one of the best political history films ever made. Okay, but a lot of it has to do with Dan McCabe, my co-director who edited, who was an amazing editor. And the reason I wanted to work with him is that I had seen stuff that he had edited before WGBH, made him change it. So I could see what he could do without somebody saying, don't do that.
Yeah.
And what he could do with music before somebody said that music doesn't work. Okay. And, I gave him his ability to do that. In terms of the humor, that's all Louis Alvarez and Andy Colker. I've known those guys, since the early 80s or the middle 80s, and they do films that are funny. And it never even occurred to me that, make a political film that's fun, and quite frankly, they really enlightened me in that, all the campaigns that I work with were so surreal and dysfunctional, that if you didn't laugh, you'd shoot yourself. So why not have that as part of the film too? So I learned from the people that I worked with, and glommed onto the.
You talked about what you learned from your collaborators. What do you think your collaborators have learned from you?
You have to ask them. I don't know. It's kind of like, most people that I've worked with have wanted to work with me again. I think they, maybe just like the passion, and just the energy that I had making those films. And like I said, it's kind of like, it's always been a very collaborative process, Keith, which is the way I wanted it. And it's not like I'm a dictator who knows everything. At the same time, I realize that somebody has to make a decision.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're there for. And even if your decision is wrong, it's a decision, and so you don't force people to anything. I treasure the fact that when we were making Last Man Standing, we're driving all over the state to shoot. It's long drives. And Deb Lewis, the cinematographer, was always in the front seat. And we'd just be talking about, where are we going? Why are we going there? How does it fit into things? How does it fit into Texas politics? So that when we were there, I totally trusted her, giving her little bits of directions. There's a shot in Last Man Standing where we're over in a mall in, maybe it's Galveston. And it's the Dream Team of Democrats in 2002, which was Tony Sanchez was terrible, gubernatorial candidate.
The Democratic dream.
They're starting off in a mall. There's nobody there, and there's a large African-American woman who's catering it in the mall. And she goes, pretty good crowd today, pretty good crowd. Okay. And Deb just lets her talk, and this goes like this. And all you see is two old dudes, the back of their heads on a bench. I mean, it's like it's a Hall of Fame shot. Okay. That's because we talked. We talked about the fact this is probably they're going to lose. This is not a good, good team, and so you work with people in a way that they know what's in your brain, so that you don't have to use an editor as hands. You don't have to have a cinematographer as shooting for you. It's so maybe that's what they learn working with me, that it's that I let people do what they can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, like, as somebody who has an incredible academic resume and ran this institution for many years, you have a pretty profound anti-authoritarian streak in you.
Really?
I think so. At least you're a supporter of the independent mind, and you're always pushing for people to grasp onto freedom. And it's one of the things I was talking to Ben on the walk over here. You gave me a foundational piece of not even advice, but support when I was making Tower, sitting here in the shadow of the UT Tower, listening to that bell chime every 15 minutes. I reached out to you when I first wanted to make that film, and I asked you for an introduction to the university president or to access the president's office, because I wanted to make this film, and I wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shut down by some lawyer with a cease and desist. And you shut me down immediately in that thought, and you said, you don't need permission to make this film. This is history. Yeah. This is everybody's story. You live in this town. You went to this school. You can tell the story as much as anybody else. Until they tell you to stop, full steam ahead.
But you know that I probably did that also because I knew they told you no.
Well, and I appreciate it, because what would I have done? Exactly. So fuck off.
Yeah, right. Better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
And the thing is, that's an ethos I had lived by already in every aspect of my life. But sometimes you just need to hear the thing you already know.
Yeah.
And you need to know that there's a backstop behind you. And I feel like, I don't know, I felt so emboldened by that brief conversation that we had. And then we talked multiple times throughout the process of making that film. That film wouldn't be what it was without you. You're in the credits as a consulting producer, and probably deserve more than that. And I just, I don't know. I want to thank you on behalf of me and my team, because honestly, without that conversation, we might have been stopped dead in our tracks, the earliest days.
As much as I possibly can, I've tried to be supportive of filmmakers, especially guys like you who I really respect. The eyes of me, I never thought about using animation like that. And quite frankly, that and especially Tower, the only other film I can think of that the animation blew me away with is maybe, Waltz with Bashir, or just this, a really high level thing. And, Ben, you were really good in graduate school, and Winnebago developed in an amazing way. But what I was thinking was, besides the fact that I want to be a better person, is, how can I help people? Because quite frankly, when I was coming up, there were people like Henry Hampton, Eyes on the Prize, who helped me, and they didn't have to. They could be, and there are plenty of filmmakers who are jerks, there are plenty of people in life that are jerks, but there were people that helped me who didn't have to help me.
Yeah.
And when I was in a position for that, why would I not want to help people? Maybe they'll make a good film, maybe they won't, but maybe they'll make a better film or an easier way of doing it if I give them some advice.
Yeah.
I don't remember most of this stuff, but people come up to me every now and then and they thank me, and I would kind of remember them.
So, and have I told you my pivotal Stekler story? We were editing Winnebago Man in the Dock Motel. I was teaching here, no money, wasn't able to raise any money for Winnebago Man. I was literally credit cards and bank loans, whatever I could scrape together. And there was this moment where I think we'd just gotten into South by and we needed money for a poster. And I was out.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know what to do. And I don't even remember telling you about that necessarily, but you were around because I was editing where we all office.
Yeah.
We were there late one night and you came in and I don't even remember you really saying anything. And you just dropped a check on the desk for $2,000.
Yeah.
And you walked out. And I remember just being stunned. I was just like, I can't believe the generosity in that moment. And it was such a shot in the arm of you can do this, keep going, you're on the right track. And I've never forgotten it. And that, and so I try to do that with other filmmakers, not necessarily monetarily, but I try to meet with them, and if they want to meet, I will give anybody advice, because that was so pivotal to me, and that was so kind, and it was also so just inspiring. It was look back to what we were saying earlier, you can do this. This is hard work, but it's important work.
Yeah.
And I love that you have always been kind of the center of the film community here in Austin, and you're at every screening, and you're, in most credits for movies that get made here. And so I'm working my way to a question, I promise. At its best, what do you think documentary film can do?
Listen, I love narrative films, but the thing about documentary films is that you don't have to have $1 billion to make them. Okay, they're accessible, to be able to make, a very small crew or one person. And what they can do is they can take you all over the world into communities that you're not part of, stories, that get you, much deeper into something, than the news would ever do. What's better than that? One of the cooler things is that, as a teacher, you see your students doing lots of films, they're student films, but they're coming from their perspectives. And for the community here, being even a small part of films, like your films guys or Margaret Brown's films or Heather Courtney's films, or other really good filmmakers, I get to, help in a small way to see these amazing pieces of work, that are about completely different things, and, I can only make a certain amount of films. I've only made, I don't know, 12 films, something like that.
Only 12.
Last year you made a film with, you just mentioned her, Heather Courtney, our great friend and a lovely and wonderful filmmaker and human being.
Yeah.
And the film that you made is lovely and wonderful.
For the record, yeah.
For the record. It's a short film that focuses on the importance of journalism and again, kind of speaks to, I think so many of the films you're involved with are a microcosm of the national story, the human story told through a very specific and small lens.
Yeah.
That's your most recent completed project as a producer.
Right.
What did you learn on For the Record? How did Paul Stekler, filmmaker, change? I feel like every film changes us.
Well, first things first, I really respect Heather. She's a wonderful filmmaker. Her film, Where Soldiers Come From, is an amazing film. And I helped a little bit on that one too, but it was, she wanted to make this film. and she had absolutely no money. And I said, well, I'll raise you the money. That's, a lot of bravado. We eventually raised the money, sort of. But I also wanted to go out to the Panhandle. I loved it out there. I liked Laurie Brown, the main character. What did I learn? I don't know. It's I got to watch Heather's method, which is different than your method or my method. I don't know if I can articulate what that is. She's a one-man band. She really does shoot to sound, and talk at the same time. And it was kind of like, how do you take a character, over a long period of time, because it was shot over, 3+ years, whatever, and make it into a coherent narrative. She was able to work with Karen Skloss, who I also love, is a wonderful editor here, who's, I think I've helped her on a couple of her films as well. And it was kind of like, but I've known her since she was a student at UT. I don't know. It was a great experience. How about that?
Yeah.
And working with Heather is different than working for other people. And it was fun, being the supporter as opposed to being the director.
I'm sorry to do it. I have to stop, but I want to make sure that you get the last word here, Paul. Is there
Sure.
anything that you wanted to talk about or say before?
Just one of the cool things about being here, guys, is that they're filmmakers like you, who I really respect, that I can hang with, whose opinions I really trust and treasure, whose films I like, and you're one of a community of people. And I think that I'm not sure that many people know just how strong the documentary community has been and is growing to be even more, now. And a lot of the filmmakers that I knew, when they were first starting out, like you guys, have become really, really successful in doing bigger and bigger films. Austin is a pretty amazing place to be part of this film community. I want to sell this like it's, like I'm a real estate agent or something or other, but to see the difference between what it was like when I came here in '97, and all there was Rick, and Robert and a few other people, and Hector Galan, was sort of doing his PBS stuff. That was it. Now it's a really amazing place, and being able to see the growth of the Austin Film Society and South by Southwest, the Austin Film Festival, and especially my radio, television, film program, which has become a nationally recognized great filmmaker program, pumping out filmmakers. Nothing better than that. Just nothing better than that.
Well, Austin does a pretty good job of patting itself on the back historically, but the documentary community doesn't get enough focus. And I think you haven't gotten enough focus as a foundational figure and an architect in a lot of ways.
100%.
To the support and the growth of you. You named them, but I'm happy to rename them. Margaret Brown, Heather Courtney, Deb Lewis, Sandra Guardado, Ben, to some degree,
David Hartstein,
David Modigliani.
Yeah.
The list goes on, and there's a whole new generation of folks kind of coming up that are benefiting from the continuum that you set in motion, some of whose names we haven't even heard yet.
That's right.
But they'll probably reach out in the comments and let us know.
If you sat me down, I could probably do a whole list of people whose films I really like, and just seeing them go up.
What about the people whose films you don't like? Will you give us that list too?
No.
Wise. That's right. We live in a digital age. Everything is too readily available. Well, I know Ben's got to go. We could sit here and chat. We'll continue to chat. It's been great being here at the RTF school, stealing on the campus of the University of Texas, like I've done so many times before, our shots.
That's right.
And
back to where it all started. That's right. Thanks for taking the time, Paul, and thanks for all you've done for the film community and for me personally. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for making the time, guys.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Let's let that bell ring out.
Oh. The chimes of UT. You know what they're singing? We put more money into the football program.
Next time on DocWalks, we are doing something a little different. I feel like I say that every episode.
You
but
do,
that's what's
yeah.
great, is every time it is something a little different. That's why you keep coming back.
And you know what's funny is you don't say it differently every time. You say different.
In exactly the same way.
Yeah, you don't say unique. You don't say rare, unusual. We're doing something a little different.
We're talking to a journalist. We're talking to a film critic, reviewer, and reporter, Austin Chronicles Richard Whitaker.
That's right, and we have a very serious conversation about the cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is one of those episodes that is topical, it's timely, and I wish we didn't have to do, quite frankly, because it's tough information to talk about.
It is, but I'm glad that we get a chance to talk to Richard because he has an inside line on what is happening in our industry from a unique, rare, and special point of view.
Ooh, I like what you did there. See, growth. We're all growing. We hope you grow with us, and we'll see you for the next one.
That's next time on DocWalks. DocWalks is created, produced, and edited by my friend Ben Steinbauer of The Bear.
Hello. And my friend Keith Maitland of Go Valley.
Thanks for tuning in.
Follow us at DocWalks Pod on Instagram, X, and YouTube.